Hello, Mountaineer fans. It's Chris Anderson, owner and publisher of earsports.com, the West Virginia University site on the 24/7 sports slash CBS sports slash Paramount Network. Before we get into our preview podcast with myself and Mike, I wanted to take a moment to let you know about a very special season opening deal. 75% off VIP access if you sign up for an annual membership right now. It comes out to less than the cost of a fast food meal for your family for an entire year, 365 days of VIP access. You get the largest Mountaineer message board, reduced ads, the best WVU coverage, and all for just pennies a day. The deal ends soon, so be sure to sign up at earsports.com. That's EER sports.com. Now, on to the preview pod.
Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com, a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casaza. That is Chris Anderson. It is Thursday morning of game week, number 1 at West Virginia. Number 8, Penn State. Chris comes to town. Um, just skip the intro. We've been writing and talking and thinking about this for weeks or months or just time on end right now. I think a lot of people are just ready to go. Include me in that group. I think we could probably lump you in as well. Let's talk about the matchup here. Just skip the pleasantries and the pros at the beginning, just get into the nuts and bolts, the stats and figures.
Let's do it. West Virginia versus number 8, Penn State. We're done. Is that good? How in depth do we need to get here?
It does sell itself. I was thinking of this. I don't know how many more there are, and I've come up with 3 or 4 more in my head. 4 straight years with a Power Five opponent to start the year. I
Mm.
can't imagine there's many that have done that, and I do not have a list in front of me, but it is a small number of schools. I want to say that the number 4 is involved. There's either 4 total or 4 more. And then this is something that West Virginia has kind of pulled its hair out for a while because, as we mentioned, 3 straight losses to start the year, all on the road for Neil Brown. And then I guess if we are going to go into stats and significance, Chris, what does this one mean? That Neil Brown is 3-6, and then to take that a step further, those 3 wins are against FCS teams, and the first game against an FBS team in those 3 seasons, he's lost, which makes him 0-9 as a head coach in the season's first game against an FBS team. That's striking to me. 1-8 would probably strike me. 2-7, okay, a couple years at Troy, he's had a tough draw here at West Virginia. I just think of a guy who was um, acquitted himself as so detail oriented and process oriented in building those details and processes, and then seeing him through that you would get one of these games early in the season, and to be 0-6 in openers against FBS teams, 0-9 in your first game, it just the larger that number gets, the bigger every one of those gets. And this is a huge one. Obviously, it's a hard one to win, maybe harder than all these other 9, except Clemson in his second year at Troy. Does that stat just speak for itself? Can you caveat it? How much of a storyline do you think it is Saturday? Or even in a conversation leading up to Saturday?
Yeah, well, I'm blown away. I mean, we sit here, we talk on this podcast and other podcasts all the time. We write 1,000 stories a week. We're on our message board. We hear all this stuff. We read other things. How have I not heard that stat before? That is a wild stat. That is, I think it would be a bigger story if it was more talked about, because that is kind of alarming. Now, granted, you just went over the reason that there's a little bit of a strength of schedule talk here. When he's been at West Virginia, it's been a lot of not just FBS, but Power Four openers, some of them on the road. And then when you're at Troy, typically when you're opening early in the season, you might not be opening against equal or lesser talent. You are usually opening against better talent.
Mm.
So it is there is some strength of schedule issues there, but 0-9, like you said, if it was 1-8 or 2-7, you say, hey, he's probably played a better team in almost like what 7 or 8 of those 9 games, teams that you would consider a better, more talented team. But 0-9 is kind of striking.
Yeah, his 2 very good teams at Troy opened up against 2 pretty good Boise State teams. And does Boise State nowadays go like kind of strike fear? And but they were humming back then. They had a pretty good program, certainly a good group of 5 program, and so did Brown. And those were good games, competitive games. Actually, I think one of them kind of got away from Troy a little bit, but those were both good teams for both those seasons. And then some of the other ones, Missouri, NC State was his first game at Troy. You had the Missouri game here in his first season. I mentioned the last three, and this will be four for his 10th year. So they've run into some good teams that are either poised to have a good season or are just good in general. Um, just hasn't got the better of it here. And then this is just a challenge now because it's Penn State. It's a preseason top 10 team that a lot of people think could challenge for the Big Ten. Schedule does not have Michigan this year. It always used to have Ohio State and Michigan. And for James Franklin, that was sometimes a bit more than he could swallow. Now he only has Ohio State, which is a huge one. Don't get me wrong. Good team here, Chris. This is probably non-conference as good as they've had in campus for a long, long time. A rivalry, so there's a whole bunch of significance here. And as you shared yesterday, they've sold out the game, but also the season tickets largely on the back of this Penn State game too, which I don't care. That's a significant achievement for Neil Brown and the program in West Virginia. But the circus here on Saturday is going to be considerable. How much of a factor do you think that will be when it comes to both teams? I think Penn State will be pretty jazzed about this too.
It'll be important for West Virginia. I think it'll be help bring the energy. A lot of talk, I think, during the press conferences about, hey, what's the impact on the helmet communication, and do you want it loud? I don't think it matters, especially with the helmet communication. I think it's not going to affect one way or the other, but I do think it'll give West Virginia, the players, the energy they need to kind of take things to another level, as if they're not already there. I mean, it's kind of hard to not elevate your game even without the crowd. I'm not, I don't want to take anything away from the crowd. Neil Brown has asked for the crowd to come out and take it to another level, but you are playing the number 8 team in the country. You are opening a season where internally, I think it's safe to say this is a team that considers themselves a Big 12 contender, a team that should be in the top 25, a team that could could win 10 games, should win 8 games, something, along those lines, while the rest of the country views them as a 6 or 7 win team, middle of the pack Big 12 team, and not really a contender. I don't think they need the crowd to boost themselves, but it sure can't hurt.
You mentioned the motivation. If number 8 Penn State Fox Big Noon season opener it doesn't get you going, then probably need to pick up pickleball, I would think. What do you think of some of the, I would say, some slightly bold comments from Garnett Hollis? And I don't think it's much, but him just saying, I just Penn State just kind of doesn't respect their opponents unless it's Ohio State, Michigan. I'm not sure there's any fallacy there. And certainly, if you played for Northwestern, I could nod my head and go,
Yeah.
"Hey, you're probably right."
I
No
was gonna say,
offense to
did
Northwestern.
anybody want to be like, yeah, like a lot of people thought that about Northwestern, so I don't know if it's a Penn State specific thing, but
Chris Anderson, not Mike, to the Hollis family. And then Ed Vesteranen saying that, well, two things. People are going to be upset with him, I think, for saying that he has made a lot out of the final Penn State touchdown, and more specifically, the celebration of an offensive lineman who we might talk about in a second here, which he cherry picked because he wants to do that celebration because he'll be going against that offensive lineman. So they made it like again, they made a meal out of that last score, which whatever, we don't have to litigate that here. It is what it is. Neil Brown said that 3 times in trying not to make a big deal out of it. But also in the facility, they have that play looped on televisions for the players to see. So it does matter. And then, Chris, it matters so much that and if I'm wrong here, I'm just going on what people have told me because I've seen it and I haven't been able to track down if it's true or false, but also because I can't prove it. But they zapped the Ed Vesteranen comment about the offensive lineman from the official video they shared, which means it's not out there on the web for anybody to see and clip and share and send to the offensive line at Penn State, which makes me think that maybe they just got a little bit out of their lane. This is a team that is pretty confident, but also spent like all of last year being mad at the world, and now has another reason to be mad about something. It seems like they're trying to stoke that fire as much as they can. Um, a little bit of gamesmanship, a little bit of shenanigans here. I kind of like it. I don't blame anybody for speaking up and speaking out, but just the reaction and response to some of this has surprised me a little bit.
no, I mean that's what good players, good teams do. Like again, yeah, I'm with you. I don't fault anybody for taking exception to everything and putting the chip on your shoulder. And I'm not comparing anybody on this team or this team as a whole to like Michael Jordan, but that's kind of stuff that he would do. He would make up, but take even the smallest slight and make it the biggest thing in the world to try to push himself. So I think the players doing this is fine. It's healthy. I guess. But you kind of want it if you're a coach, if you're a fan. I was talked about this with Landon Tangenwall, former Penn State offensive lineman. I hopped on his podcast earlier in the week, and he brought this stuff up too. And we kind of settled into this zone of if this game were week 5, would any of this be talked about? Would anybody care? Because I wonder how much of this is, oh my God, we've been talking about this game for 8 months,
Yeah.
and this is where we're at. We've run out of things to talk about, and now we're here. Does it change if it's like, this is a week 2 game or week 3 game? Like say West Virginia's opening against Albany and then playing Penn State in week 2, or maybe even week 3 or 4.
Yeah, you'd have more recency to draw upon as far as like what happened in the first couple of games, wins or losses, injuries, performances, slumps, things like that would certainly take stage and bump stuff like this to the side. However, Chris, this game was almost a year ago, and that was a play that didn't really factor in the outcome at all. And I just felt like there was some salt in the wound there that
There are some bettors that would beg to disagree with you,
yeah,
Michael.
that's true. But I don't think any amount of saline was going to wash that out, and you can tell it still bugs them a little bit. I mean, I understand that West Virginia could have stopped any of that from happening at certain points, but West Virginia was also still trying to win the game. The fact that it happened, that probably bugs Vestern and his cohorts as much as the fact that they couldn't stop it, which again, I think that's probably equal ammunition for them. Is like let's just be better. Let's not let them score in the goal line if they get in the red zone. You remember what happened last time? Let's shut it down this time. I think it's healthy. If two teams don't like each other, especially in a rivalry, you're not going to see each other again for quite some time. Listen, push each other, smack each other, step on their feet. I don't care. If you talk a little smack too, that's fine. Let's get into the matchups here now, Chris. Offense, Penn State. Defense, West Virginia. To me, this is the high profile one because if you like sideline matchups, this is a really cool one because Penn State has Andy Kotelnicki and West Virginia has Jordan Leslie. I don't think either offense or defense here is going to look the same as it did last year. Obviously, Penn State will be different. West Virginia personnel philosophy, it sounds like, will be different too. What strikes me here is that Kotelnicki has a bit of a one-up on West Virginia because of what happened the last time he came here at Kansas in 2022. You say, all right, well, what does it matter? It's Kansas, the different personnel. I get that. Chris, that was the second game of that season. Kansas had blown out FCS team the week before and shown very little of what it ultimately did in the next game. And that caught West Virginia off guard. And it certainly had an impact on them scoring 4 straight possessions, 6 out of 7 once they got going. They haven't seen Penn State do anything yet. So they kind of don't know what's going to happen. It's not apples to apples. I get that. But this early season matchup against a coordinator who can be tricky and creative, I think that certainly gets your attention in the days leading up to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously that's the biggest factor is how is this offense going to change? Because you're going to see, at least as far as the high profile guys, a lot of the same faces. You're going to see Drew Aller quarterback. You're going to see Allen and Singleton in the backfield. Some changes at wide receiver and O line we'll talk about, but those are kind of the guys, the playmakers, the guys who are going to start things, whether it's the quarterback throwing the ball or the running backs running the ball, that are going to be the same. But how are they going to be used differently in this new offense? And as you mentioned, Kendall, he's been outstanding. He was outstanding at Kansas. That's why he's one of the like higher rising young coordinators in the game. It's why Penn State went out and got him. It Who knows what they're going to be? I mean, even talking with the Penn State guys, even talking with Tyler Donahue from our site Lines 247, he said they haven't seen any 11 on 11. They've had some access to practice and such, but no 11 on 11. So, when we talked about, hey, what's going to be a key here? How can it said it all depends on how Drew Aller and this offense comes out. Like, is it the same? The last time that anybody at Penn State saw true 11 on 11 was in the bowl game where, and this stat blew my mind. Tyler told it. I haven't, verified his stat. I'm going to take it for truth here. Drew Aller did not complete a pass to a wide receiver in the bowl game until halfway through the fourth quarter. Like, that's blowing my mind. And it doesn't shock me. I know he had an excellent game against West Virginia last year. We've talked about that a ton. West Virginia game planned a certain way, said Drew Aller beat us, and he did. But every other time that Drew Aller played in an important game, every other time that it was close, he was terrible. He was terrible against Michigan. He was terrible against Ohio State. He was terrible in the bowl game. So It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that offense. And if they don't really know what's happening outside of whatever their um, facility is called there in Happy Valley, I can't imagine West Virginia does either.
Yeah, the win-loss splits for Aller. They went 10-3 last year. 10 wins, 65% completion percentage, 2,075 yards, 7.3 yards per completion, 21 to 1 touchdown to interception. So you're talking 200 yards, two touchdowns a game in the 10 wins and just one interception total. Three losses, and again, good teams like Michigan, pretty good last year. Ohio State, um, I think Neil Brown said they had a sporty little team last year, which I loved. And then Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl, 47 for 104, 556, 6.3 yards per attempt, four touchdowns, one pick. So they couldn't run the ball as well in those games, and they put the ball in Aller's hands, and like that's not the position he wants to be in. But I want to say those are three very good teams, and in particular, two very good defenses last year. That they saw repeatedly in the Big Ten. So they have a bit of a caveat there too. Um, I don't know, Chris. Running backs or tight ends here? I think that's the hinge. We could spend a lot of time on Aller. I think people just kind of understand the premise there. We don't need to belabor that point. He has all the physical tools. He's just a redshirt sophomore. This is his second year as a starter. When he's good, he's very good. When he is made to win the game on himself, on his own, maybe not as good. That could all change if you can slow down their running game and maybe neutralize their tight ends. Is that too simple, or do you think that's a good way to go here?
Yeah, I don't think it's too simple. It's going to be easier said than done if I can stop stuttering here. That the key to West Virginia slowing down this Penn State offense is to provide a balanced look while slowing the run game. Because again, the mistake, and it was a mistake. I don't disagree with the game plan. I think it was the right idea. Was they essentially shifted their entire defense into shutting down the run and opened up wide open passes for Allard to pick them apart. Some of that was some personnel problems. Some of that was some play by the actual guys on the field. But they schemed it that way. This time around, maybe something a little more balanced, and you're going to have to put a lot of pressure on those front two lines to win their one-on-one battles and slow down the run game, keep the tight end from going crazy, and maybe just maybe you'll do enough to get the win here.
Yeah, they're going to probably run three tight ends out there too. Maybe not at the same time, but that Warren kid's really good. He's our leading returning receiver. I think he tied for the team leading touchdowns last year, like 6'6", 250. They have a redshirt freshman, Andrew Repellier, who already has people talking about what a matchup problem is he is, and a veteran in Dinkins who's been around and knows how to play. So they're going to have probably a lot of 12 personnel out there. Maybe you see three out in goal line or short yardage situations, and that might, Chris, compensate for their receivers. Well, two things. It might compensate for the receivers, which you can get to here, but also just more hats to block for Allen and Singleton, which is what they want to do. And again, not to harp on this, but Nicky's always been really good about making use of tight ends and moving them around as extra offensive linemen, extra blockers. That shifts of motion that he did here at Mountaineer Field in 2022. That's what he did in every game when they were really good on offense. He just kept people guessing and unbalancing the formations or just kind of getting that numerical advantage. So I think those tight ends are going to be significant factors in the offense running it or catching it. Do you want to go with the receivers or the running backs here? Because you could talk equally about both, but for very, very different reasons as far as like proof and productivity coming back to the team and not.
Yeah, I'll take a second to talk about wide receivers, but I want to ask you a question. Should I print out and frame this Penn State depth chart projection that has six tight ends on it from our Penn State site?
How
Six.
many oars?
Yeah, there's three. There are three oars
I
with
know.
six tight ends. That is, man, that's beautiful.
Blaine Stewart's in his office like, huh, six tight ends in the depth chart. Huh?
That is fantastic. Yeah, wide receivers. It's again, this is one of those things of who knows? Who knows what's going to happen here? Their top two wideouts from last year, Lambert Smith and Cephas, have both transferred. That left a lot of open space for somebody to fill. And Harrison Wallace is a guy that I'm told is going to be kind of their top target. 19 catches last year. Like he just doesn't have a lot of experience right now for that to be your top target. They brought in Julian Fleming, who was a former five-star recruit everybody raved about, went to Ohio State and was kind of like 4 years and fewer than 1,000 yards, and now comes back to Penn State and has been kind of again. Like you don't want to, you never want to discount those kids who obviously have physical attributes and the talent to be something special. That's why they got their five-star rating. You don't just pass those out willy nilly. But I'm looking at these depth chart projections, and after talking to the Penn State guys, there's a chance he might not start. He's in an or situation at one of the outside receiver spots. So it could be a situation where like there aren't a lot of options for them to kind of hit those big explosive plays to the wide receivers.
Recruiting class didn't really help him out a whole lot either. I was just looking at that the other
Mm.
day and I was thinking, all right, well, they got to have somebody in there. Maybe that's why they hit the portal as hard as they have, but kind of surprises me that I don't know, could they find somebody that is just, a 4 star or one of your teal chips, Chris, but somebody who can come in and make an impact here. But you don't see that too much, and maybe it's a developmental thing. But even last year they tried to have some transfers in there. Cephas was one, like a highly coveted player who just didn't pan out for them, and here they go. Running game, Chris. There's 2 teams in the entire country that have 2 running backs who have combined for 1,700 or more yards and stayed at the same school the entire time. Penn State is one of them. Allen, Singleton, they're similar, they're different, they're both good, they can both run it and catch it. They are who and what we talked about last year at this stage, except they're a year older, faster, stronger, better. Running with a little bit different offensive line, especially on the outside, but also in the middle. I'm not even sure how much you could look at trends last year. Yeah, they ran really well around left tackle last year. Well, they had a pretty good player left tackle, not the same right now, but I think these two can probably make it happen on their own. And West Virginia has tinker with their defense, certainly to get bigger people in the middle who can make sure that nothing happens in the A or B gaps and you bounce it outside and you chase and tackle. This will be a heck of a test because West Virginia knows that they're going to run the ball and probably do it early and often here.
Yeah, at the running back spots with Allen and Singleton, I wonder if were they already basically at their ceiling as freshmen? Is there another,
Hmm.
step for them to take? Statistically, some of their numbers are down. A Singleton especially went from 6.8 down to 4.4 yards per carry. Their touchdowns are down, but that stat can be a little bit more volatile with depending on who gets the carries near the end zone and what your game plan is. Um, but really, I think a lot of this, so much of this is how much success they're going to have. Because I think, whether or not they can take another step up, I think their floor is extremely high. Like there's just not going to be games where they're not running, period. Like they're just at some point they're going to have some sort of success running the ball during a game. Unless there's problems at offensive line, which seems to be the biggest issue here for Penn State, or at least their offense. Um, think it was 2,600 snaps from last year
Yeah.
gone. 3 of the 5 starters gone. Trying out a new center. Talking with some of our Penn State guys. Both of their tackles have been banged up. Shelton, I believe it was, at right tackle, and then there might even be a rotation at right tackle.
Yeah.
You never feel great about rotations on the offensive line. Like very, just I get it if there's, hey, you want to get a guy in for 15, 20 reps, but whenever you start talking about, hey, pretty even. We might split the reps for 50-50. I haven't really seen that work out well at West Virginia. Sometimes they've tried that, and eventually one of them just falls by the wayside. Eventually one of them transfers for whatever reason or moves to a new spot. So there are some question marks on this offensive line that might hinder the running game.
Yeah, one guy that you want to keep an eye on because we mentioned him. We didn't mention it, but we referenced JB Nelson. He'll play probably a backup guard position, but as you mentioned, he could be on the field a bunch. That's the individual who did this when Bo Prabula scored with 6 seconds ago, and Ed Vesterinen has circled that, remembered it. So keep an eye on that one. 56 for Penn State. One more, Chris, before we go. Over under on Bo Prabula snaps. 4.5.
Under. I think the game's going to be closer. I don't think they mess around with it.
I think you might see him in some gadget status. We'll see. Have a
Mhm.
nugget for you too, Chris. I've heard
Yeah.
as far as 11 on 11 stuff, there is a stretch from the spring game at the end of regulation, which the end of the game, where the good guys are still in the field and they're in a 2 minute offense and they're going. And there's formation to the sideline, which is like 3 receivers on the short side of the field. No motion, but certainly some routes that look like they're going to be formidable stuff to in the flow of the game to counter. Um, that's probably some 11 on 11 that has West Virginia's attention. If you want to go find the clip, you can. I might share it later on, but have heard that that's been isolated and talked about because you're right. They've kept everything under wraps, what's going on there, which is not to be a surprise. Let's flip sides now. West Virginia offense, Penn State defense. Penn State sacked the quarterback more than anybody in the country last year, set a school record. West Virginia top 5, I want to say number 3 in the country for fewest sacks allowed. Wyatt Milam hasn't allowed a sack in 25 games. You can go ahead and knock on wood. He will probably see a lot of Abdul Carter, the linebacker who is now a defensive end. Um, either way, Chris, West Virginia's defensive line, Penn State's offensive line, as you just mentioned, or the converse here, West Virginia's offensive line, Penn State's defensive front. This seems like you can just circle and go, all right, whoever ends up on the right side here probably ends up on the right side of the scoreboard too. Advantages or concerns when it comes to West Virginia's offense here?
I mean, I think you have to be concerned. Again, all five guys are back that started for at least 4 games for West Virginia last year, over 3,000 snaps from last year, plus a couple, plus the addition of Xavier Bosley, if you want to consider him as a sixth guy there. But as I believe it was Neil Brown said, quote unquote, it starts with 11 and 33, Abdul Carter and Danny Dennis Sutton. And those guys come off the edges, they get after the quarterback, and they're not alone at all. And you go look at, let me pull this up, pull up my notes. Um, of the top 4 players in the entire Big Ten with pass rush rating from Pro Football Focus, top 4 returners in the league. Number 1 is Josh Joyner from Minnesota, so we'll skip past him. Number 2, Abdul Carter. Number 3 is backup Amin Vanover. Number 4, linebacker Tony Rojas, who I believe depends on how again, I'm not privy to Happy Valley stuff, but I believe he's sliding into maybe that linebacker role where Carter was. Now that Carter is more of this defensive end type, it might be a scheme type, obviously scheme changes with a new coordinator as well. But that's a lot of guys who are very, very capable of getting to the quarterback and winning their one-on-ones in the pass rush.
Yeah, repeatedly too. That's what they do.
Yeah.
A bit different now. Like Manny Diaz was a defensive coordinator. He's the head coach at Duke now. Beat out Tony Gibson, by the way. And Tom Allen is in, who I don't know has much of a reputation as a defensive wizard based on his experience as the head coach at Indiana, but he's doing a 4-2-5 now, which how much of that is going to be like an even front when you figure Carter probably going to put his hand down and pass rush a lot. He might stand up and pass rush a lot. So maybe it's like a 3-4, like a 4-3 where he's you can see what I'm saying. Like we all
Yeah.
know the 4-2-5 can be bent and reimagined in different ways. What's going to be interesting is how they use that fifth defensive back because it certainly sounds like they have so many safeties that they really like that they're going to use a third defensive back. Excuse me, that fifth defensive back is going to be a third safety. And then you get into some things about, all right, well, West Virginia kind of likes its receivers and some of the twitchy people we mentioned. Perhaps they put a guy who might play outside in the middle in the slot, and he can make some problems there happen. I really wonder about that fifth defensive back. How much is a nickel, like an extra cornerback? How much of it is an extra safety? Because it's what they want to do. Because by the way, it might not be a bad idea to have an extra safety who can cover because we know the Mountaineers are going to run the ball too. That should be a pretty interesting thing here right now. Their secondary they've had a number of good corners through the year. They have some transfers in the SEC, Florida and Georgia that have Mississippi State that have made their way into the depth chart, maybe in starting positions. They have, like I said, a bunch of homegrown developed safeties that they really like. And we just mentioned their front. Chris, I was stunned to revisit this, but they were one of the best defenses in the country last year. They led the country in some significant stats that are counter to West Virginia's strengths. We mentioned sacks, tackles for loss, number 1 in both, fewest rushing yards allowed per game, fewest rushing yards per carry yard allowed per game. Ooh, and I granted things change. I understand that, but I just forgot because they were so early in the season and not in the Big 12 how good they were on defense here. Where does West Virginia swing the sledgehammer here and try to crack this open?
Before I get to that, can I drop one more stat that might be my favorite stat about this Penn State defense?
Well, if it's your favorite, yeah.
Okay. I just Since we're already to the portion of the podcast where we're gushing over the opponent to really infuriate everybody on our message board, I figured I'd just keep going. But I thought this was wild when I was trying to was looking up on a couple guys that we'll talk about in a minute. But Penn State played 803 defensive snaps last year. I talked about last season. I even wrote a story like 5 or 6 games in that Beanie Bishop, Lee Koba, several others, they were playing 99, 100% of the defensive snaps for West Virginia against FBS opponents. The most snaps of anyone on Penn State's defense last year, with 803 played, was 588. No one played out more than 600 snaps. And I believe I'm looking one, two, only 3 guys went over 500. So they are getting guys last year. They got guys reps. They got guys in. I mean, it's obviously easier when I'm looking at the games like You're winning by 60 over Delaware, you're winning by 30 over Iowa, 30 over Northwestern, 60 over UMass. You can get guys into those games. It's a lot easier to get somebody your second and third string reps when that's happened. But they really spread out some of their snaps and some of their reps to help build this depth. And I think that's what's going to help make them even stronger on defense this season.
Answer the question, Chris. How do they attack this formidable, maybe even legendary defense?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the options, like all the options of the running game. Like not the actual triple option. We're
I
not
was gonna
like
say, don't talk about that, Chris.
there are three options. Oh wait, cut that out because there might have been a picture of that somewhere or a clip of that somewhere. But the one we're past the days of change your offense to try to exploit a weakness of a defense. If you are a running team, don't try to switch into a passing team because the other team has a bad cornerback. Just don't do that. It's a bad idea. It's bad football. Build on your strengths and go with it. And West Virginia has three very, very legitimate running options in Green, White, and Donaldson. Make the Penn State defense confused. Make them be rushing into the backfield. They get tackles for loss. They are aggressive. Use that aggressiveness against them, counters, options, all sorts of different things. And I think West Virginia might be able to kind of break a couple free ones just because Penn State's going to be so aggressive, so in the backfield with so many guys that, oh, thought he was handing it off to Donaldson there and Green's gone. Or thought it was getting to White there, but it's actually going to Donaldson the other way, gone. That's the kind of stuff that I think West Virginia can actually find success with on offense.
Yeah, you're going to see some RPO stuff, some option stuff. I think you're going to see a lot of different people in the backfield, two running backs, running back, receiver, and it's like a shell game, Chris. Like you mentioned, there's three good runners back there. They could change the identity of the three people a bunch and have three good runners back there. And if you start to succeed that way, whether it's gaining yardage or getting the defense off balance, that the confidence comes into question and even a very good secondary. And then all of a sudden, what West Virginia does, they run to throw the ball deep. They bring you forward, they run play action, they have you lean in one way, and all of a sudden the receivers running the other way instead of blocking. And they try to hit home runs that way, which is what they're going to do. So they're going to try to come out and run their offense. There's probably going to be additions or some nuance, I would hope. And in the core, though, it's going to be what it always has been, I think. And then you go from there too. Any concerns about the matchup? Because I think a lot of us like what we see from West Virginia's offense. When we've seen good on good, we've seen about 5 hours of football in the preseason. When I hear about the Penn State camp, I feel bad for them. We're privileged to a lot of good on good, even too. Like what we see, but we also know it's a good defense there too. Let's say this instead of being negative, Chris. Are there things you're excited to see for West Virginia, or are there things you're concerned about for seeing? Because I can think of a couple, and part of it is like, what if they stop the run with that front? And they squeeze everything, can they get open and free themselves from jams or pressure like they swear they can do because everybody's bigger and better at receiver? Talk about it, great. Be about it is something else, especially when the lights are on. That's one for me. Where do you start?
Yeah, I would say there's one thing on each side of the ball that I am excited to see or to see how it goes. I don't know if it's an unknown. One of them maybe is more of an unknown than the other. But on offense, this team, like I think there was a lot of excitement once the season was over about how great the offense was, how amazing it was. If you go back and look and you look at deep dive on the actual stats, it wasn't amazing. It was just good. And but I do believe there are the pieces there. And when you have enough experience coming back on the offensive line and you have the quarterback, you have the two running backs, feeling pretty good, tight end and wide receiver, I believe West Virginia has the potential to have a legitimately great offense. Again, I think too many people called last year's offense great. It was a great running offense. It was a good overall offense. I think this team has a chance to be a great overall offense. And hey, man, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And if you want to have a great offense, you got to be able to do that kind of stuff against great defenses. And this is an opportunity for that offense to kind of come out and say, hey, we're legit. And this is what we're going to do this season. And again, Penn State is one of the best defenses. You can do it against them. You can do it against anybody.
Hey, Chris, it's about that time. Noon kick on Fox. We'll catch up a couple hours later. Me in the press box, you in the office in Richmond. Who or what are we talking about that explains whatever the outcome is? We wouldn't dare pick an outcome, but certainly things are going to factor into it one way or the other. This has to be important. This person has to matter, whether it's a win or a loss. Where do you start?
All right. I'm going to try to remove myself from just saying Garrett Green for 12 straight weeks. And I'm going to say the offensive line because I believe, again, you talked about Wyatt Milam never giving up a sack. This is going to be his toughest test yet. This will be his toughest test of his college career. Nick Malone, assuming he's starting at right tackle, this will be the toughest test of his college career. You got a brand new center. Again, a lot of experience, but
Mhm.
in new places with new combinations, and you're going up against one of the best. If West Virginia finds success on offense, it's because that offensive line did what they were capable of doing, and they did it against the best. So I think if they win, we're talking about that. If they lose, I think it's because the offense isn't able to move the way they're hoping to, and you're going to be looking at the offensive line and wondering, hey, were those comments in fall camp about the right side being weak? Is that a problem? Is the loss of yeah, just casual loss of an All-American and 4-year starter, Zach Frazier? Yeah, it's a big deal. So I think I'm talking offensive line one way or the other.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good one too. I think that, like, for me, the Garrett Green and defense would be, can the cornerbacks play? I don't want to say that every week until it's proven one way or the other. So I'm going to go to this. These are both two pretty clean teams when it comes to turnovers. Penn State didn't turn over hardly at all. West Virginia didn't turn over hardly at all last year. Garrett Green, I think he had 3 turnovers total for as much as he played and the way he played, ran around through the ball. So that's good. Penn State in the last 2 years, Chris, is plus 1.1 per game in turnover margin, plus 1.1 per game. And that's good. The turnover scoring, points off turnovers, is 8.5 points per game for Penn State. So if you give it to them once, they're probably going to score. If you give it to them twice, they're probably going to get 10 points. It's crazy when you think about how much of a difference that could be. I think you're going to see offenses going up and down the field here, especially early. I think you might have to have 30 points to win this game. And I think if you forfeit 1 or 2 possessions, you're going to give the other team a touchdown, maybe a touchdown and a field goal. That could be detrimental. I would be surprised if points off turnovers weren't a factor at the end of this one.
It's a good one. Turnovers are a big thing, and yeah, Tyler, for what he is and what he isn't, did not
Eight
throw a
and a
lot of
half points per
interceptions.
game. 8.5 points per
That's
game over 26 games. That's
yeah.
consistent production there too. All right, Chris, we are done with this. We are not done with the week. What do we have coming up the rest of the day? Thursday, tomorrow, Friday, got some visitors on campus, not of the recruit variety, and then Saturday, of course, 60 some thousand people in attendance for a big game.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a lot of our usual stuff. It is Thursday of game week, which means Neil Brown radio show tonight. We'll have updates from that. Assuming a real depth chart doesn't come out, we will put in a final depth chart projection, which again, last year we had to do the same thing. And I believe out of the 24 spots for the two deep, we were 23 of 24 with like a backup that was an or situation or something silly like that. So keep an eye out for that. Uh, we got 3-minute video coming on Friday with our Penn State
Mhm.
site, expert picks, 3 key matchups. Oh man, we got all sorts of stuff coming, Mike. And hey, because it's still the preseason, still got the countdown going, which includes my game by game picks for the entire year going up on Friday.
Can't wait. I
Oh,
had the fresh set Friday morning, got some by the numbers, top 25 stats to know about this game. And then again, Pat McAfee, Fox Big Noon Kickoff, they're all on campus on Friday too. Might have a chance to catch up with some of them, see what's going on. One way to find out. Stay tuned. Keep it on earsports.com. Catch you after the game. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
and I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.